Next item on the list. Hitman 3 is currently in development and may be going towards an episodic model again. And I will tell a funny story here while we're here. This is from that Scafidi says, but resources. You're right. You're right, that Scafidi, but resources. What could have been done with those resources, guys? They could have added some extra sweat texture to the soldiers. Instead, they decided to go with a watch face. This story's from Matt Kim. I'm not going to read this whole entire thing to you, but he draws some conclusions from a quote from a no-clip documentary with IO Interactive, which is the team behind Hitman. For those of you uninitiated, IO Interactive bought themselves out, and they're currently independent. They're not with Square Enix anymore. The studio was going to be sold, and rather than be sold, they came in and said, what if we bought ourselves out? So they are now independent, and they are working on Hitman 3, and we get that from this quote from CEO Hakim Abrak. It says, quote, Hitman is a trilogy. There's a bright future. There's this full realization of the whole world of assassination that we're looking towards as well. The world of assassination, when that's complete, it's going to be one game with all the locations starting from Paris in Hitman to the last location in Hitman 3, end quote. And so the article continues, and there's some speculation going on that they're going to return to an episodic model for this. So for those of you uninitiated, when they first announced Hitman, it was going to be a full release, and they took pre-orders for it to be a full release. It was going to just be a $60, hey, here's the whole game in one big chunk. Here you go. Then the game got closer and closer to release, and all of a sudden, the pre-orders for the game started to get canceled, and Sony started to send out these messages like, due to a change in I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but it was essentially like, hey, due to a change in the way that the game is structured, we're refunding all pre-orders. It's being returned to your PlayStation wallets, yada yada yada. And that change ended up being that they were releasing the game episodically rather than as one big game. For the second game, however, they returned to a singular release, and it didn't quite have the same success. The first Hitman in this trilogy that was episodic had a really great reception among fans. And the second one, while good, failed to capture the same kind of commercial success that I think the first one was able to accomplish. And so I think that's some motivation behind the episodic release again. I think that they're hoping to catch lightning in a bottle again. I'm not sure if it was necessarily the episodic model, though, that really helped that game succeed. I'm trying to think of other kind of episodic games we've seen in the last couple years that have been really successful. Because we've started to see more and more places migrating away from that. And I don't know how you guys feel about episodic, but for me, I don't have the attention span for an episodic release. Like I'd love to get into Life is Strange as it's coming out and be a part of the conversation that goes on around that game as those episodes are coming out, but I just can't. I've tried a couple other episodic games. I tried getting into the old Walking Dead games from Telltale. I tried getting into the Game of Thrones game from Telltale, which I understand that one is considered to be not that good as far as the Telltale games are concerned. But for me, it's just, I can't play a 90-minute, 2-hour episode and then be like, all right, guys, I think I'm good for 2 months while I wait for the next one, or 3 months while I wait for the next one. I just can't do that. And then by the time it gets to where all of the episodes are out and I could just marathon through them, the conversation's passed. Everybody talks about those games as they're releasing, and I like to be a part of that conversation as it's going on. And I don't think that I'm in the minority here. That's Graffiti says, I mean, it worked for Telltale. JK, they're gone now. And it's true. And Telltale had a lot of other issues, right? They leaned on an engine that was old as hell, and that they had kind of taken to the edge and well beyond the edge, and just never quite was able to get a handle on in a way that made it work across everything that they were releasing it on. I think that there was probably a lot of bloat in overhead due to the fact that they had to license the franchises they were making games for. So I think there was a lot of things. I don't think it was just the episodic model, but I don't think the episodic model helped them at all either. But I told you I'd tell you guys a funny story. So when I worked at Twinfinite, I was on the I mainly wrote opinion pieces and features when I was at Twinfinite, but occasionally I'd have to reach some, sort of writing quota, and I'd end up writing some news. But the only news I would ever take was if the news was actually breaking. If I was pulling it from a source that wasn't GameSpot or IGN or Polygon or Kotaku, I didn't want to pull a story down from there and just rewrite it for Twinfinite. I always wanted to write something that was like really fresh, or it was news that wasn't being covered by somebody. One of my most popular stories at Twinfinite was GameStop did a deal one year at Christmas where you could buy a used PS4. It was a buy two get one deal, and it essentially worked out where you could get the PS4, Xbox One, and a Wii U for like less than $500 or something. And nobody was publishing the story. I published it, shared it out on Facebook, tons of views. Got a ton of views on that story. Made a lot of money, quote unquote, a lot of money. When you're getting paid per views, I made a lot of money on that one. So I was always like watching Twitter or watching, I can't remember the name of the forum at the time that I was watching, but essentially the reset era of back then. I'll remember it eventually. And I'd watch these places for these stories. Well, I started to notice on Twitter that people were getting these weird emails from Sony saying that their Hitman stuff was canceled. And for your news articles, it was really dependent. Your success was really dependent on being the first to N4G. So if you were breaking a story and you could be the first on N4G with a juicy story, your views would skyrocket. And so I'm starting to notice the stuff on Twitter. Nobody really knows what's going on because the email was just very, very vague about why these pre-orders were getting canceled. And so I did what a good reporter would do. I don't have a journalism background, but I knew what I was supposed to do. I started typing up the story, Hitman pre-orders on PS4 getting canceled, customers unsure why. And I emailed the PR for Square. I was like, hey, can you give me any insight on this? They sent me back some like boilerplate response about we have some announcements moving forward, blah, blah, blah. And then about 15 minutes later, they released that email they were sending out to people who were reaching out as just like a press release. But we needed to get it out pretty quickly. And so, but with any kind of like breaking story like that, I wasn't allowed to just publish it without running it by an editor first because they wanted to make sure there wasn't any speculation, anything like that. And so we finally get it out. I get on to N4G. Nobody else has published the story yet. I'm like, yes, fucking gold mine. I'm going to get all the views. Publish it. I get a report. I get a rejected, like failed notification a couple minutes later. And it was a mod saying, why are you saying that nobody knows why it's happening when we know what's happening? And why did you claim that a PR person sent the quote to you when it's just the release? And I was like, well, I can send you a screenshot of the email that they sent me that I sent to them minutes before. And they were like, they ended up giving the news story, because the way N4G works is it's like an aggregator and they don't want a bunch of people publishing the same story. So they ended up giving it to another site and I did not make a dime off of that story. And I was like sprinting to the finish line to get it. I was pissed. So that's why that story like just sticks in my mind, because it was like for just a few minutes there, it really was like hey, why nobody knows why they're doing this. There's speculation as to why, but nobody was really sure why they were canceling them. That's Graffiti says, of course, due to the nature of Hitman, it can work better, at least for people who play it in a completionist fashion. There's a lot to do in each episode, and by the time you get it done, the next episode comes out, assuming it's not the only game you play. And that's a really great point, that's Graffiti. That's the difference between like a Telltale game and with Hitman. Hitman is designed with replayability in mind, and I guess you could say like Telltale games and those more story-driven episodic games are as well. But for a guy like me, on those story-based games, I have my playthrough. It is my playthrough. My favorite game of this past generation, one of my favorite games of this past generation, is Firewatch. And Firewatch has multiple endings, multiple dialogue options. There's a lot of choices you can make throughout the game to craft it the way that you want it crafted. I've played the game once. I've written several pieces on the story. I talk about that story all the time, that game all the time when I talk about favorite games of this generation. I've played through it once because that's my playthrough. And Telltale games are the same way. Like, I don't want to keep going back and replaying it 5 different times to see all the different choices you can make and all the different ways that it falls out. Whereas Hitman is designed to be like, how many different ways can you figure out how to kill this guy? Can you do it in this area? Can you do it in this area? Can you do it with this weapon? Can you hide in this place? Can you kill him with this costume on? Like, there's a lot of different ways to play it, and I think that they even have like a trophy system around it, right? Of being able to do certain things in certain ways. So yeah, I think that's a really great point, Escafidi. Like, Hitman has things that call you back to it that aren't necessarily that isn't just a story. There's a way that it can carry you through between the releases. Can you kill them with a coconut? Which is a question I ask myself every single day.